wow, turns into murder, which is kind of my favorite thing ever. I also just totally kicked and moved the tripod, so oh, wouldn't be me. I dog-eared this thing to death. I'm making weird arm poses. So if I could pull from this one and add it to this one, if, which is absolutely my favorite book that I read in November, whenever you're watching this. Hi everybody, it's Audrey and welcome back to Chapter and Converse and welcome to my November wrap up. I'm filming in December, we're talking about November, we're just gonna keep going, So I'm going to do something I haven't done in months, which I'm gonna talk about all the books I read in November in one single video. So at the risk of repeating myself, but just in case it's your first time here, welcome to the channel. I spent the month of November doing National Novel Writing Month, which basically the goal is to write 50,000 words in 1 month. I was editing my book, rewriting my book, doing all sorts of stuff, but I wrote 28 of the 30 days, which I'm super, super proud of, but I definitely put some other stuff to the side. And when I was getting ready to film this video, I was like, I didn't really read that many books this month. Surprisingly, I actually read 9 books this month. Some of them are very short. I did a lot of audiobooks. It all still counts, but in my head, I was not reading that much, but apparently I read some stuff. So anyway, I have some very fun books to talk about this month, pulling them closer to me as I try to talk to you and not look awkward. But I had a good month, so I'm excited to talk about some of these books. So first book I want to talk about is Dead Wind by Tessa Wiegert. So this is book number 3 in the Shana Merchant detective series. I have talked about these books many times on this channel. So I read the first book, Death in the Family, in 2020 when it came out, which was an isolated thriller. Shana is an NYPD detective who winds up relocating to upstate New York. And this series takes place mostly in upstate New York. She tends to maybe go someplace else to do some other stuff, but I don't want to talk too much about plot because a lot of these stories are obviously interconnected. So we wind up getting Shana with her new partner, Tim, in book number 1. There is a murder mystery on an island that they go to investigate. And then we have some threads that carry through books 2 and 3. So I really don't want to talk about anything, but we basically have a thread that carries through the books as well as a new case that takes place in this book. So should go without saying that we have police investigation. One of my favorite parts of these books is the dynamic between Tim and Shana. I like the atmosphere. I like the I can't talk about, like, I want to like mention things, but I'm like, oh, I feel like that's gonna like just give something. So the dynamic between the characters is fantastic. There's some very good mystery in this. Book number 1, like I said, is an isolated on an island, rich people behaving badly, which is my fave. And it's like this small town setting, but there's a lot of drama. There's a lot of history. There's a lot of legacy to the town and to the families and to the connections between our characters. It's atmospheric, it's cold, and it's just a very fun time. So I do have books 4 and 5, which I have talked about in my book haul, which you may or may not have seen by now. And I'm excited to continue in the series. So if you're looking for a new series to get into, if you are just low-key intrigued, I would definitely pick them up, but I'm glad I read this one and I had a good time with it. Another series I continued in, which also happens to be book 3 in the series, is Faithful Place by Tana French, and this is part of the Dublin Murder Squad series. So I have read books 1, 2, and 3 in that order. I do feel like I still would highly recommend you read 1 and then 2, but if you wanted to just enter the series, I think you could just start here. Nothing in this book gives away anything from the first 2 books. So the way the Dublin Murder Squad series is set up is each book focuses on a different detective within the Dublin Murder Squad as the main character. The characters in 1 and 2 are very intertwined, and I do feel like there's great benefit to reading those 2 in order. And then Frank Mackey, who is the main character in this book, he's a secondary character in book 2. I would say he plays like a bigger secondary role, but nothing about that book is required to read this one, and nothing in this book gives away what happens in that book. So hopefully that gives a little bit of context. I know there's always a question with series about like when you can and can't dip in and out of them. So I'm just going to read them in order just because that's me, but you do you. So anyway, book number 3 in the series. So in this one, back in 1985, Frank was a 19-year-old kid with a dream of escaping his family's cramped flat on Faithful Place and running away to London with his girl Rosie Daly. But on the night they were supposed to leave, Rosie didn't show. So Frank took it for granted that she'd given him the brush off, probably because of his alcoholic father, nutcase mother, and generally dysfunctional family. He never went home again, and neither did Rosie. So 22 years later, Frank is a detective at the Dublin Murder Squad, and he winds up getting a call from his family, who he still has a bit of a dysfunctional relationship with, that a suitcase has been found in Faithful Place, and it might have a connection to what happened to Rosie all those years ago. So in this book, we are getting dual timelines of 1985 Frank and present day Frank. And present day, this book was written in, I'm behind the times on these books. This book was written in 2010. So I very much enjoyed Frank in book number 2 and the dynamic that he had with my girl Cassie Maddox, which you guys have heard me talk about a ton of times. So I enjoyed this book, but not as much as the first 2. There's a lot of family dynamic to this. There's a lot of dysfunction to this. Those are not reasons why I didn't like the book. But I did feel like it was a little, not less investigation, but there was a lot of personal relationship dynamics, which I felt took me out of the investigation of the story. So while I am not one who shies away from a dual timeline book, and I am 1000% someone who is writing a dual timeline book, I felt taken out of the story when we switched timelines in this one, and much more enjoyed the investigation in the present day, even though what we learned in the past certainly impacted what we needed to know in the present. So didn't not enjoy it, but enjoyed the first 2 more, if that makes sense. And I'm definitely going to continue in the series, like I said. So I did mostly this on audiobook. And now comes the inevitable question of who read it. And now comes the inevitable admittance that I don't have that queued up and ready. So hold on. It was read by Tim Gerard Reynolds. I do very much recommend these books. The first 2 books, In the Woods and The Likeness, I did a combination of reading and listening on audiobook. I am definitely down for an Irish brogue. I definitely think the audiobooks lend to the humor. There is a dark humor to these books. There is a dry, dark wit to these books. Frank's a fantastic character. And like I said, I really enjoy him. I definitely think the audiobooks are a great way to go with these books. But anyway, so liked it, didn't love it the way I loved the first 2 books, but I just am so in awe of Tana French's writing. She can turn a phrase, she can paint a picture, she can write just really compelling, complicated relationships, and she does not shy away from darkness in any shape or form, which is probably one of the reasons why I love her. So anyway, I'm excited to read more of her books, and I own the entire series, so that's going to happen. Okay, another dark book that is all by itself, and which I mean it's a standalone, is Kill Show, and this is by Daniel Swerin Becker. So this book came out maybe in October, I want to say. So it's The Nation is Obsessed, What Happened to Sarah. This is a very interesting look at true crime and the country's obsession with true crime in sort of a very dark and uncomfortable way. So in this one, we have a missing girl. Sarah Parcell is a high school student. She disappears without a trace. She was on the school bus with her friends. She forgot her backpack on the school bus, so she goes back to get it, and no one ever sees her again. So understandably, the case makes some national news, becomes a national obsession, and then the family agrees to be a part of this reality TV show documenting the investigation in real time. So in a very cutting edge kind of a way, like rather than this retrospective documentary after the fact, they are broadcasting the show as events unfold and sort of crafting the story of the reality show as the events unfold. So without the benefit of 20/20 hindsight, It's very interesting to see how they're working on the show and sort of the cutthroat nature of the reality TV crew. So the book itself is told 16 years after Sarah's disappearance as a retrospective of what really happened, of the reality show that covered it, of all the people involved. So you're getting the testimonials of everyone who was involved at the time. So it is told in an interview format. And one of the things I love about this, and it's not like it's a humorous book, there are moments of levity and humor to it, but you're seeing kind of like if you were watching a documentary where one person is like, oh, I was like the absolute star of the show. I was amazing. Like everybody was happy with me. And then the next person's like, she was such a pain in the ass. I couldn't stand dealing with her. So you get to see all the back and forth of everything and how it all unfolds. And I just thought it was really well done. I was definitely, I mean, if you can't tell by the tabs and the dog earring, they have different meanings. I had a really good time with this book. It's definitely a quick read. It definitely feels like you are a fly on the wall and you're getting the inside track, which are things that I totally enjoy as well. But like I said, the uncomfortable nature of the obsession and fascination with true crime was, I feel, very well done. And also like in a bit of an uncomfortable way about how people tune into these tragedies and how things are sensationalized and not everybody is there for the right reasons. And it's just really, really well done. I highly recommend it in case you can't tell. I thought it was great. Okay, let's switch gears for a minute to some nonfiction. So I listened to The Woman in Me by Britney Spears, which is read by Michelle Williams, which was so well read, I would say. And I feel like this is one of the biggest things I've heard. Michelle Williams is fantastic. Why is this woman not like narrating more audiobooks? So this is, it's Britney's entire story, but I would say heavily focuses on her family. I mean, I feel like, can you really spoil nonfiction? I'm not going to like talk about any of there were no like big, there were like a couple big booms that came out of the book, I feel like, but at this point I feel like they're already out there, but just the same, in case you haven't heard them and you want to not be spoiled for it. But the book is chiefly focused on the dynamic between her and her parents and her entire family dynamic, which is such a sad story. Like to hear about her upbringing and the dynamic between her parents, never, like even before we get into the conservatorship and that whole element of it, but just to hear in her words, I mean, like, it seems like her life was never her own. Her decisions were never her own, whether it's when she was younger and she was being managed, as you should be when you're like 11 years old. I mean, you need an adult with you and adult supervision. But to reach a point where she was a grown woman and she was performing and she was making money and she still was being told when to go to bed and what she could eat and couldn't drive her own car, the dynamic of her and her ex and the challenges with her children. And I mean, it's just all so painful to read so much of it, but to see some of these very public, sort of like infamous moments through her perspective was also really interesting. So I thought it was very well done. I could have listened to hours and hours of her talking about just like what it was like to be with Baby One More Time, like what it was like to perform in the VMAs. Like there's little nuggets of things, but I feel like she has so many stories to tell and I feel like we got like this much of it. So I could have listened to so much more. I have so many questions. The woman owes me and us nothing. But one of the things I was really curious about was the jarringness of fame and sort of what it was like to go from, you know, quote unquote, like obscurity into this mega star and everything that she was, and what it was like to manage that fame and handle it. And again, we get like little snippets of it here and there, but a lot of it is just sad. It's sad. And I hope that Britney is on the other side of it now and she has control of herself and control of her, like her finances and her life and her decisions and can go out and live the life that she wants to live. But I'm glad I listened to it. I definitely think it's worth the listen. And again, Michelle Williams, just absolutely phenomenal. The next audiobook I listened to is Christmas Presents, and this is by Lisa Unger. This is also more on the novella side, I would say. I think it's like 200-ish pages. So this was read by Jennifer Pickens, and we are getting, again, sort of like an element of true crime to this. So Madeline Martin has built a life for herself. She has a thriving bookstore, the Next Chapter Bookshop, dreams to own a bookshop in a small town. And she had some tragedy in her childhood, and she is now taking care of her father, who was the former chief of police, who is not doing so well. He's got some health issues, and the book should probably be a hint that it takes place at Christmas time. So when she was in high school, she went to a party with a bunch of friends of hers, and her friend Steph was killed. 2 other friends of hers had gone missing and have never been found, and she was very violently attacked and survived. And Evan Handy is the man who was arrested for this and who is in jail. So he has always claimed his innocence, but he's been in prison. And she was the eyewitness. She's basically responsible for putting him there. So we get a kind of failed novelist turned true crime podcaster who comes to town, and he is investigating this, and he has met with Evan, and he is trying to tell Evan's story. So he reaches out to Madeline. She is very reluctant to deal with this, but his presence obviously resurrects everything, and we get to revisit the case. So I was very intrigued by the premise of this. I love a true crime podcaster coming to town, true crime reality show, and wreaking all sorts of havoc and creating all sorts of problems and resurrecting those past mysteries. And what wound up happening in this book is the storylines sort of ran more parallel. So Madeline is kind of forced to revisit the past because this man has brought everything up to her. But then Harvey, who is the true crime podcaster, is investigating what happened. So I thought they were going to kind of come together and work together, but it's more of like their parallel stories. And I wish that they had come together, which doesn't make it not a good book because I wish it was a little bit different than it was. But I kind of wanted more from it. So like, I'm all down for a novella, but I feel like there was more story to tell. So I felt like there was a lot going on, and then the conclusion was a bit abrupt to me, and I wanted more. And then I also part of my challenge in November is I was spending a lot of time obviously working on my own book and writing my own book, and I was having a hard time getting lost in other stories. And one of the things I was having a problem with is while I was reading other people's books, I was starting to really analyze and decipher and try and play by like the rules of writing a thriller and trying to figure out where this clue was, or was that a hint? Like I was analyzing a lot of what I was reading and not losing myself in the story, which was a me thing. So I definitely think I was trying to puzzle the solution to this book, not in a I'm reading this for fun kind of a way, but in a I'm a writer, how can I break this book down and then put it back together again? So I had a hard time getting lost in it, which is not about the book not being easy to get lost in. It's a me thing. So I don't feel like my perspective on this book is totally clean, because I definitely was looking for like where she dropped clues and where she did this. So I'm a big fan of Lisa Unger. I've read a handful of her books. I've listened to so much of her writing advice. She is a riot to listen to when she's talking to her friend Karen Slaughter, but she gives fantastic writing advice. She's really transparent about the process. She's a pantser, which is what I am, so I really connect to a lot of the way she talks about writing books, and I like her characters. I feel like this book was too short. And it's funny because I read a book in December, which I'll talk about in my December wrap up, that I felt was a little too long. And we still had that abrupt resolution to like the climax of the book, but there was too much going on. Whereas in this book, I feel like it was too short and the climax was really quick and we could have had more on the other side. So if I could pull from this one and add it to this one, if. So anyway, it was a good Christmassy read, snow, atmospheric. Definitely enjoyed that part of it. And obviously listened to the audiobook. I just mentioned that already. So I would still recommend it. I definitely will. Definitely like a quick, easy, like bingeable thriller. I think I'd listen to it in like 2 sittings or something like that. Okay, I'm gonna stay on the audiobook train. So the next book I listened to was #Crime Time, and this is by Geneva Rose and her husband Drew Pine. So this was an audio original, full cast. There is no book of this, and this is written kind of like a script screenplay, and this was fantastic. I binged this in a couple of hours. It's only like a 4-hour audiobook, maybe like not even like a 4-hour audiobook. But this was both like humorous, investigative, twisty, just great hijinky kind of fun. And I was totally into this one. So this is about half-siblings Nadia and Chase. So she recently has found her long-lost half-brother. He is staying with her at her townhouse in Chicago. And she is a mystery writer who writes under a pseudonym. She definitely wants to and has been leading a very quiet, private life. And Chase wants to be a TikTok sensation. So he documents his entire life on video and broadcasts it out to the world. So when the book opens, they are in their townhouse and there's an apartment above them. And they're hearing all this noise. And they look out the peephole and they see men in ski masks with guns carrying a bunch of boxes. And they realize that their neighbor upstairs is getting robbed. So they call the police and nobody shows up and they're watching the men and Chase is videotaping this and like they wind up going upstairs to investigate and they wind up finding all sorts of contraband in their upstairs neighbor's apartment and they call the police again. And then things get real weird because Chase decides to continue to broadcast this on his TikTok, and overnight he goes viral, and all of a sudden he's attracted all the wrong attention, which has all the wrong people coming for him and Nadia. So they have to go on the run. Like I said, hijinks ensue. And one of the best things about this is up until the point where the police show up is loosely / heavily based on something that actually happened with Geneva and Drew in their townhouse in Chicago, to the point that they went up and investigated their neighbor's apartment. And the end of the book, Crime Time, if you keep listening to the end, you get to hear the true life story that they have. So like I said, full cast narration, absolutely wonderfully done. Just such an interesting commentary on TikTok and the social media influencer culture and social media culture and how everyone rallies around. I don't want to say too much. It's a really short audiobook. All I want to say is to listen to it because it's absolutely fantastic. It is out now as of the time of me filming this, so you can get your hands on it and listen to it. You can get your ears on it. And then the last audiobook I have is The Mystery Guest by Nita Prose. This is book number 2 in the Molly the Maid series, and this was read by Lauren Ambrose, another fantastic audiobook narration. So The Maid is her book that came out in, I want to say January of this year, and we are back with Molly again. So if you read The Maid, I definitely think that it helps to read The Mystery Guest, but not necessary to read The Mystery Guest. And I loved The Maid. I thought it was such great fun, kind of, it's sort of cozy with a side of darkness, I would say. And this book is the same. So in the first book, Molly walks in to one of the rooms that she is cleaning at the hotel, finds one of their top guests murdered, and she becomes a prime suspect in it. And in book number 2, there is an event being held at the hotel, and a world famous mystery writer is there, and all of his fans are there, and he winds up dropping dead in the middle of his event. And Molly, while not a suspect, her head maid is one of the suspects. She becomes involved in trying to help solve the crime. And what I really loved about this book, sorry, I just heard something that totally distracted me. Squirrel. What I really loved about this book is we get dual timelines in this one. So we get to see Molly and her Graham when Molly is younger, and we get to see kind of the spark of how Molly the maid is born. Like, she's not a baby, but we get to see sort of where her passion comes from. And we get to see the dynamic between her and her grandmother, which I absolutely loved. So there's such a sweetness to this. There's also some sadness to this. There is some darkness to this, which, you know, I love. And I do find Molly to just be fun to watch. She is not always like, doesn't always have her filter on, which is great. She gets to see her nemesis again, the detective, and we get to see some of the same faces from the first book from the hotel. So this is like, I want to say like 2 years later after The Maid is supposed to have taken place. So the hotel obviously took a big hit when somebody was murdered, and they are finally like getting their reputation back and building their reputation back up and getting guests to come back again, and they're thriving. And then they have somebody die during an event in the middle of their hotel. So not the best for the hotel overall, but I really enjoyed this. It was a very easy listen. And like I said, I very much enjoyed The Maid. I enjoyed the dynamic with Molly and the other characters. And I do think she has a bit more of a strength to her in this book. She still has that same innocence, but she has, I don't know necessarily if she has more of like her wits about her, but she's definitely learned from book number 1. And again, I think it's really those flashbacks, which are important to the present day storyline as well. But getting to see the dynamic and relationship between her and her grandmother, I just found so heartwarming, and I just loved it so, so much. And I feel like it gave us great insight to Molly as a character, and also just the dynamics between the other characters in the book. So we get to learn more about her. We get to see more of her backstory, and it's a great way to sort of expand on the world of Molly and all of her friends. So I thoroughly enjoyed it. I was able to get this as a Libro FM ALC advanced listener copy, so thank you so much to Libro FM for that. And again, highly recommend this book. Okay, next up is Suddenly a Murder by Lauren Muñez. I also just totally kicked and moved the tripod, so oh, wouldn't be me. So this was a gift from Janine. Thank you so much for sending this to me. And this is a YA mystery, probably more than thriller, but mystery thriller. And I really enjoyed this book. So this is an isolated thriller. This is a group of friends who have just graduated from high school, and as their graduation party trip, it's a bunch of mostly super rich kids. They wind up renting an island and going to it for a week for a party. So context, super rich. So Izzy is our main character. She is not the super rich. She is the outsider for the group. And her best friend, Cassidy, has decided to throw this 1920s themed getaway. So Izzy and Cassidy's favorite movie was filmed on this island at this mansion. It's a movie set in the 20s, and they decide to have like this whole 20s party. So everybody, they come to the island on a boat. Everybody has to give up their clothes, their cell phones, everything goes back on the boat. And Cassidy has fashioned everybody's room with outfits to wear and anything and everything that they would possibly need. So no cell phones cut off and no sort of perks of modern times. And what starts as a good fun time of partying and hijinks, and it's a co-ed group of friends, so we get some mixed dynamics between everybody, turns into murder, which is kind of my favorite thing ever. So we wind up getting multiple points of view, we get multiple timelines, and we get to see why everybody had a motive for murder, which starts to get revealed throughout. And through the past timelines, we get to see the dynamics between the group, and we get to see how they are acting in the present and why, and what the relationships are between everyone. We have kind of a maid and butler who are taking care of them at the house, who are doing a lot of eye rolling at their activities and hijinks. And then when the murder rolls in, things definitely get a little bit more challenging. And then we have a detective and a consulting detective who report to the island to look into things. And everyone obviously is a suspect, and everyone needs to prove their innocence. So Izzy herself winds up kind of investigating it, doing her amateur detective bit, and we get to follow the investigation through her eyes. And I really enjoyed this because she's finding out the secrets of her friends, she's connecting the dots, and I thought it was fun. I thought it was a fun time. I thought it was well done. I want to say this is a debut, and it is. So I'd be curious to see more of what she comes up with. But I liked the 1920s dynamic. I liked the friendship dynamic between all of them. Lots of secrets, definitely some dashes of darkness to this. So not like a total easy breezy book. And what else can I say without saying? I feel like there's nothing else I can say without saying. But isolated vibes, like I said, group of friends, lots of dark secrets and things going on between them. Definitely rich kids behaving badly, and a lot of, I don't know, I feel like the dynamic between these complex groups of friends is one of my favorite things. So whether it's YA or it's adult, I just love the complexities of that, and just, it's definitely like heightened more when you're a teen, but I thought it was well done. It didn't feel especially young to me. That's something sometimes I struggle with, in the sense that it makes me feel very old, but I had a fun time with this one. And I loved the idea of them being at a place where a movie was filmed, and not that they were reenacting the movie in any kind of a way, but the connection between the movie and sort of their passion for this place and their love of the movie, and getting to be where their characters were and where things were shot. And I think about like movies that I loved, and you got like, if you see, I see all these things, which is not what this book is, because it's not like slasher horror, but you see all these people who do these YouTube videos about being in the Scream house, which is an actual real house. It wasn't just something built on a set. And if you were staying at that house and knowing like, this is where Billy did this, or this is where Tatum did that, or this is where Sid did this, just how cool that would be for a movie that you're super passionate about, to be able to like be at that location. And then, not that I would ever want things to turn horror movie really bad, creepy at all at a place that I was, but to be able to then have bad, messed up things happening. This isn't making any kind of a sense. Long story short, it was a really good book and I had a fun time with it. So thanks, Janine, for sending it to me, because I really wanted to read it, and I'm really glad I did. So that's this one, Suddenly a Murder. And now I'm going to try and get us back to where we were, but I feel like I'm not going to. Okay, let's just continue. Let's just continue with the next book. And then the last book I have for November, which is the last book I read in November, which is absolutely my favorite book that I read in November, is Good Girls Don't Die by Christina Henry. So I talked about this in my October new releases, maybe, when it came out. So this was gifted to me from Berkeley, and I freaking loved this book. So when I got this in the mail from them, I was totally intrigued, and I know a lot of you guys were also when I read the back of the book. So this says, getting lost in a story can be deadly. So we have 3 different women, Celia, Allie, and Maggie, and they all wake up in a situation that they know is not right, that they know they need to get out of, and they need to figure their way out of each situation. So Celia basically wakes up in a cozy mystery and all I could think was like a Murder, She Wrote, Hallmark movies and mystery. So she wakes up in it, she knows like that man is not her husband, that kid is not her kid, what is happening here? And she needs to puzzle her way out of it. And then Allie wakes up in a horror movie, in an isolated cabin slasher flick, and she of course needs to find her way out of it. And then Maggie wakes up in a YA dystopian story, and she needs to find her way out of the game. So this was such an inventive story. This is the first Christina Henry book I have read, and I was so hooked. I was so impressed by the innovation of this book, by how this totally leaned into all the tropes we know and love of each, you know, a cozy, a horror, and a dystopian. And it was so familiar, but so unsettling. And what I totally like fell victim to, which of course we were supposed to fall victim to, is I was feeling what the characters were feeling. I was having the same assumptions. I was having the same thoughts. And it was so like claustrophobic yet compulsive, and like I couldn't help but think like, what would I do? What would I do? And you're trying to stay one step ahead because like you're familiar with the tropes and the cozies and the thrillers and or the horror and the dystopian. So it's like they know what they need to do, but you're in this world that's not quite right. It's so interesting. It's so fascinating. And I don't want to say anything else about it, but it was so much more than I thought it was going to be. And I was, like I said, I was intrigued by this book out of the gate, and it really, 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 really blew me away. The writing was fantastic. The characters were fantastic. Again, you sort of had like some humor and some definite darkness. I dog-eared this thing to death. I'm making weird arm poses. And I don't have enough words to talk about how spectacular I thought this book was. If you had any desire to read this, I would absolutely pick it up. If you were a little bit hesitant about reading it, I would definitely pick it up. It definitely gets a little violent. I mean, we've got a horror movie, and I think a lot of us are familiar with The Hunger Games. And it exceeded my expectations. I loved the ending. I loved the beginning. I loved everything in between. Like, I compulsively read this book. And when I tell you, which I already told you, I had a really hard time losing myself in other people's stories this month. And I was so preoccupied with my own. It was very hard for me to turn my brain off. And I was able to really turn my brain off with this book in all the best ways. And I'm super excited to get into more of her books. So she does have a new book coming out in 2024, the name of which is escaping me. Turn your eyes over here and I will show you what it is. And then I know she has a pretty good backlist. So she's done some, I don't think they're retellings, but she did Lost Boy, which is Peter Pan, and Red Queen, which is the queen from Alice in Wonderland. And then she did Alice. And I feel like, I don't know if they're retellings or reimaginings or just the stories from different perspectives with a very thrillery horror twinge to it. But I was so impressed. So impressed by her writing, so impressed by this book. So grateful to Berkeley for sending it to me, but definitely my best book of the month, hands down. And like I said, I'm so excited to read more from her, but it was just so good. It was just so, so good. I don't have enough words to say how good it was. I loved it. I loved it. I loved it. And I'm going to leave you on that high note. I loved it. I loved it so much. So let me know, what book did you love to pieces this month? Or November, whenever you're watching this, which is probably the end of December. If not, it'll be the end of December. But let me know whatever. Let me know whatever you want to let me know down below. This totally filled my like Final Girls Girl bingo card thing, which was fantastic. And I just had such a good time with it. But anyway, let me know whatever you want to let me know down below. You know, it's your oyster. The notes comment section is your oyster. Okay, I'm going to go. So thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you for being here. Thank you for putting up with this. And I will see you guys in another video really soon. Take care, everybody. Bye.